Every single person that's alive or who has ever been conscious has random thoughts. Every single person, including Jesus, the greatest saints, the Blessed Mother. Every single person has experienced thoughts that are intrusive or unwelcome. There is not a person who has ever lived who has not, at one time or another in their experience, had a thought that produces the question, I wonder where that came from. Still others, in fact, the majority of people, have the occasional thought that is embarrassing, produces a fleeting feeling of shame and guilt, or some other powerful emotion. What is different between every other person and a person who suffers with scrupulosity in the form of intrusive thoughts is that most people can easily let them go once they are experienced, because they do not hold on to them, examine them, emotionally beat themselves up over them, or any of a other multitude of behaviors that are unsettling. They soon fade into the background and are gone until the next time they unexpectedly appear. Not so with the scrupulous. The thought is generated. It produces a feeling of guilt, shame, horror, and they are often running, engaging the full range of emotions that are available to them and tapping into their time-tested and obsessive rituals and behaviors that can at best calm them, but only for a very short period. If there was some way to effectively capture the intrusive thought, segregate it from all emotion and feeling, and then closely examine it in a completely different context, the person who is examining the thought would see it for what it really is: mental gibberish. Upon close examination and stripped of the emotion and feeling that it generates, it's nothing more than gibberish. A toxic mixture of some remembered memory, a favorite word or symbol, perhaps even a religious context of some sort, all mixed up in some kind of toxic dump to join all of the other accumulated, useless gibberish that serves only to feed the fear and the anxiety. Mental gibberish is often thematic. Men and women who suffer with thoughts that they routinely identify as blasphemous are struggling with God thoughts. These thoughts are really our attempt to figure God out. In the process of thinking about God, unfortunately, we are subjecting God to the quality of our thinking. What happens is we begin to believe in our God thoughts and not God reality. God becomes the servant of our thoughts, weak, wimpy, fleeting, and as compulsive as our thinking can be. For all people, thinking about God is a creative labor. For the scrupulous person, thinking about God includes the distorted thinking that's generated by scrupulosity. Their creativity is severely restricted and then narrowly focused on producing the emotional response that the disorder requires in order to thrive. The result is that God that we mentally generate and then relate to is fashioned from mental gibberish. The truth is, for all people, God thoughts are only projections of how we view reality, and particularly how we experience ourselves. If God is conceived as a stern judge, then we might see ourselves as irresponsible children. If we conceive God as a loving and forgiving and empathetic father, then we see ourselves as fundamentally immoral, sinful, and weak. If God is conceived of as the lover who loves unconditionally, then we might see ourselves as an unlovable person, unworthy of attention or acknowledgement. God thoughts are projections of our experienced weaknesses, reversed and dressed up, but nonetheless projections of how we think about ourselves, primarily what we fear about ourselves. Thinking about God does not reveal God to you. Thinking about God with a scrupulous mindset reveals not God, but only your emotions and feelings, disguised to look like God or God's will for you. But it is an illusion. Thinking about God demonstrates that you are thinking, but it's not God. All that thinking can do for a person is to provide you with hints or clues about the ultimate reality. For the scrupulous person who's suffering with intrusive religious thoughts, what is revealed is not assuredly God, but rather your suffering and incompleteness. Ask yourself, not why am I offending God with all these thoughts? Because you're not. Ask yourself, why do you feel that way about yourself? Take God out of the feeling and just pay attention to the feeling. That is where the work needs to be done. It's not a religious issue and has nothing to do with your relationship with God. It most certainly has absolutely nothing to do with sin in any shape or form. It's all about you and your suffering. A teaching story from the Arabian tradition might be illustrative at this point. It's taken from the collection entitled The Song of the Bird. Nasruddin earned his living selling eggs. Someone came to a store and said, "Guess what I have in my hand?" "Give me a clue," he replied. "I'll give you several. It has the shape of an egg, the size of an egg. It looks like an egg. It tastes like an egg. It smells like an egg. Inside it's yellow and white. It's liquid before it's cooked, becomes thick when heated, and it was, moreover, laid by a hen." "I know," Nasruddin said. "It's some sort of cake." All that our thinking can do is provide us with clues. Even our religious thinking can only provide us with clues. When we think about heaven, for example, we imagine perhaps a state of uninterrupted happiness as some future unimaginable place. Or in the common phrase, heaven and earth, we think of heaven as a set of circumstances where all the conditions of life are so arranged that everything we ever dream of is at our beck and call. Like Nasruddin heeding the clues of our thoughts, we miss the obvious. The mental gibberish of scrupulosity begins with catastrophe. It is all about the worst possible outcome and catastrophic experience. And finally, it ends with catastrophe. A neat little package of catastrophic thoughts, feelings, and emotions. Thank you very much. This perspective on life is not what has been gifted to us by God. We have been created by God to live in the present moment, the eternal now. Although we have a past and anticipate a future, that only reality that we have is the present moment. When intrusive and religious thought deprive us of the present moment, they inflict not only psychological suffering upon us, but also very real spiritual suffering and anguish. Notice carefully how easy it is to experience disruption from the present moment. How often does the intrusive thought draw you into the future, to something that is bad, or something that might happen in the next moment, the next year, tomorrow, in a week, in a month, a year from now, in the life that is to come, in eternity? This is all mental gibberish. True happiness, God, heaven, love, forgiveness, everything that is important and necessary, do not exist tomorrow. They exist at this moment, now, already. With the grace of God, try not to get caught up in all of this mental gibberish. Try and recognize it for what it really is. It is possible. It is necessary. It is your lived reality to be at peace and free from anguish and desperation.